So it's two diverse families, after crashing into an island, have to survive the elements and getting along with each other. I think it speaks a lot about what's going on in our country, but there's lots of, are there pirates? We might find gold, shark attacks, all the things that you'd want to happen on a deserted island film script happens.
All of the fun things.
Yeah.
Hello everyone, welcome to Let's Fix Stories. My name is Jaylan. I am a editor with 1 Billion Arc, and we are super excited to be here today. We're going to be looking at Mira Walton's screenplay, Off Course. And this is a podcast where writers bring their stuck, tangled, or not quite their stories, and as editors, we walk them through it, help them figure out what's working, what's not, and how to tell their story in the best way possible. So I will let Mir introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what got you into writing screenplays.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. I'm Mira Walton. Like you said, I'm an author and a screenwriter. I started writing, I've been writing all my life. I was a theater nerd, majored in theater in college, and directed a couple shows, started a theater company.
Nice.
Kind of naturally fell back into writing as my kids were getting older. I have 4 daughters.
Wow.
And started with novel writing first, and wouldn't encourage anyone to read the first couple I wrote. And kept going there a little bit. Yeah. And then 2020 pandemic, found the screenwriting community online, actually on Twitter, and lovely folks, and met a lot of nice people. And so kind of started dabbling with screenplays. Actually, Off Course is one of the first ones that I wrote, because it was from an idea I'd had a long time ago. And then at this point, I'm almost hitting the 10-year mark of being a writer, where they say you start to actually feel like you're coming out of emerging a little bit. So I'm excited for that. And I have a short story collection actually dropping on April 12th that you can pre-order now from marawalton.com, or it's going to be sold on Amazon. So it's just 3 short stories, probably 30 minutes a read per story. So just something fun to get out there. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and I've self-published 3 books, 2 thrillers and a Christmas kind of Hallmark kind of book. And then I have roughly 6 scripts that have placed various competitions, done well. So
Awesome. That's so exciting. Yeah, and you mentioned that Off Course also was a finalist in a competition as well.
It was a semi-finalist. Sorry, I typed that wrong.
Oh, nice.
It's semi-finaled a couple times with the Page Awards, but I do have other scripts that have been finalists, yeah.
That's so awesome. You are a very accomplished storyteller in a bunch of different mediums. It's so fascinating to get to talk with people, because I feel like a lot of storytellers, we don't just commit to one medium. It's the journey kind of brings us through all of them, and they're all so different. You wouldn't expect it, but novel writing is very different from screenwriting.
Yes.
And performing on stage is very different from performing in front of a camera.
Absolutely.
And yeah, what was your experience going from, scripts in theater to writing screenplay?
Well, it's funny you mentioned, so novels and screenplays, it's like I use all of the words, but I'm not supposed to use hardly any of the words. So I do find toggling back and forth. I tend to, if I'm writing a novel, that I'm editing other novels or marketing other novels, and then vice versa for screenplay. I don't try and flip. As the amazing Stephen King likes to say, you can work on one project in the morning and a different one in the afternoon, but I stick with whatever genre I'm working on. Yeah, it was funny. I was a young kid, and a theater troupe kind of came through our church, and I got a little part in whatever, and somebody said, you should do that. And I was like, okay. Just kind of started doing community theater and found my people and worked some summer theater programs. I would say probably the biggest difference for me as a writer is I'm not using any duct tape. Backstage, you always got to grab that duct tape for something.
Yeah.
I was on my first movie set in the fall for a little local festival. We did a 72-hour film competition that I helped write the script for. So that brought me back to duct tape times.
I love this. I love that duct tape times. That's wonderful. There's very similar stories with the 1 Billion Arc editors. I started out in drama clubs and ended up writing the script for one of the plays that we did, because I was the writer of the class, and the director was like, you can write this. And Charles, also our other editor, who's not here today, but he grew up theater brat as well, has a lot of fun stories, and there's something so special about that community.
Oh yeah.
I think a lot of novel writers, you can tell me your experience, but I feel like a lot of novel writers don't necessarily experience that physical community around the storytelling as much. It's more of a loner, a loner profession or way of expressing that creativity. It's, you have all of those online communities, but it's really hard to get plugged in if you're not already. So
Yeah.
did you have that experience of like when you went from doing theater to writing your novels and screenplays, did you have to work harder to get plugged into a community, and how did you find your community?
So I've been super lucky. Like I said, I actually had a family member who wrote a short piece and was accepted to a journal called Glimmer Train, which is not in existence anymore, but ran for many years. And I was named by them as like one of 25 writers to watch for that quarter, whatever it was. But that was just enough juice for me to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to keep going. And then, like I said, I found the writing community on Twitter first, and then the screenwriting community, and just have been really lucky to be embraced. It is really hard to get friends and family, A, to read your books, B, to buy your books, C, to want to listen to you talk about your books. I'm a little luckier with the screenplay because I actually have a daughter who majored in theater, a daughter who is majoring in musical theater, and my husband was a theater minor. So they will all sit around the table with me and do a read aloud of scripts. So that's actually super helpful. It's really helpful to hear your words read aloud.
Yes.
Because when you're early starting, you realize people don't say just every 3 seconds, or any of those fun things like that when you're beginning, you just put it in without meaning to. Yeah.
Yes, felt that, and I will say even, not as a beginner, I still catch myself doing those things. That's why having an editor is so important, because you need that fresh set of eyes to be able
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and also to ask the questions, what did you mean here?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're definitely going to be digging into all of that
Okay.
with this story audit, but I do want to ask you to give your elevator pitch for this story, just for our audience who hasn't gotten a chance to read the excerpt that we did. Give us the story in 2 to 3 sentences.
Sure. So I was a huge fan of Swiss Family Robinson growing up, both the book and the movie, but I really felt like that's one that hasn't gotten an update. And again, as a parent of 4, that really spoke to me.
Yep.
So I changed it by making it 2 families. So it's 2 diverse families have to survive after crashing into an island, have to survive the elements and getting along with each other. So I think it speaks a lot about what's going on in our country.
Yeah.
And just, how we all need to have a little grace and more acceptance of each other, and realize that we're all on the earth together. But there's lots of, are there pirates? We might find gold, shark attacks. All the things that you'd want to happen on a deserted island film script happen. So
all the fun things.
Yeah. All the fun things.
You kind of answered my second question, which was why was this story speaking to you so strongly in particular, and what motivated you to tell it?
Yeah, so one of my favorite things about, we have remakes, reboots of everything, but I really appreciate when they try to modernize it. For example, my husband's in the medical field and loved the show Scrubs back in the day. And now that they've rebooted it, he really enjoys the language and the way that the profession has changed in the 30 years that he's been in it. And still funny, but it's a different kind of funny. They're making fun of different things than they were making fun of 30 years ago. And so I like those kind of updates. And like I said, modernizing, doing a juxtaposition of different kinds of American families. In Off Course, we have a single dad who's widowed, who happens to be Black, as are his daughters. And then we have a single mom who's divorced, 2 sons, and she's white. So it's just partially what their different families are bringing, just literally bringing with them as they're coming to the island. So,
yeah. There's something so special about exploring those themes of identity and what the strengths of differences in story. I think that's super exciting.
And I always say family's at the heart of everything I write, even when I'm today I was murdering somebody in a thriller, but, your families will miss them. So there is family in there.
Exactly. I love that. All right, well, I guess we'll dive right in.
Okay.
I'm going to pull this up on screen real quick so you can see all of the notes that we made. And I do apologize in advance because a lot of the formatting that was in the screenplay that you sent over got messed up when we translated it to
Oh,
a Google
sorry.
Doc. No, you're fine. That was not the formatting was definitely a Google Docs issue, not your problem. So if it looks weird and we didn't note anything, that's why. And if we noted something that is already corrected in the actual formatting, that is also why.
Gotcha.
But other than that, like the notes are still here. So we'll still be able to kind of show you some examples of what we say is working and not working as we go on. Again, I will be speaking for Charles since he's not able to be here, some of his notes. But we'll start out with just what is working, what stuck out to us as something really, really great in the screenplay. Um, and the first thing that I will say is there's moments I mean, we'll start with the obvious. When you're talking about family and you're talking about identity and the natural tension that comes when you smush a bunch of people together and make them have to survive, that's a great foundation for a story. First of all, it's something that we can all connect to, and it's something that we can all see ourselves in. But it's also just naturally very exciting because it's conflict, it's tension, and it's that exploration that, we all crave stories to give us. So already your foundation of this story is really great. And diving into some of the notes that I took just based off of reading it before I got to talk with you and hear even more about why the story is exciting, I feel like there's moments of really great subtext in your actions and dialogue. To show some of those examples, let me pull up. We have page 2 right here where Sarah says, "Now you want to be a family?" I feel like that moment is a great example of subtext. So we say subtext is what is being said without being said. So with just a few words and a very natural sounding dialogue for this moment and this character, you get the viewers curious and you give them hints for what the family dynamic and the history might be. So again, with as few words as possible, you're bringing up all of this complicated backstory, and now our interest is piqued and we're really interested in what is going on behind the scenes. So there's one example. Another example is this line. I
And
feel like
this is the single mom. Yeah.
yes, this is the single mom, and she knocks over her purse and overdue bills spill out onto the floor, and the oldest brother stuffs them back in his purse before his younger brother sees. And as an older sibling, I understand this feeling of responsibility to protect my younger siblings from some of the crueler realities of this world. And so seeing a detail like this in a scene, this is one of those moments where I was able to see myself in your story. And immediately it grabbed my heart, and now I'm invested to know even more. These kinds of details are super effective for getting people to invest in your story and want to watch longer or read longer. Another really great moment of naturalistic dialogue is when we're talking about just the normal bickering that comes with families and the poking fun and everything. Fritz says he's going to that wedding with her. It's fine, we'll stay here alone. Again, you don't need to give all of the information, but you give enough information that we get a snapshot of this family's life. And it's naturalistic dialogue because it's not like characters on a stage where you kind of write a theater script and it's almost like sometimes the characters know that there's an audience watching and they need to explain things for the audience. But with a story like a book or a screenplay, you have to be really careful because sometimes you can do that and the dialogue doesn't feel natural. It feels very stilted or just unorganic in that way. So this was a really great example of a way that this dialogue flowed very naturally. It was just, we stepped into the story right in the middle of what was happening, and your characters are living their lives as naturally as they would if they didn't know that we were there. So no breaking the fourth wall here. This was awesome. Another example. Of course. I did have one more example I have to see. Yes. This is where it comes to purposeful details. Meg slides some of her food onto her son's plates, and this little note came in the midst of a complicated dinner scene where a lot of things are happening. Groceries were being unloaded, food was getting made, food was being eaten, conversation was being had. But this little detail was very purposeful for showing the difference of these characters in the mundane, everyday life things that everyone does. This moment exposes the mother's character and the family's financial situation, again, in one small moment. So this is a great example of being able to, again, show us what is making this family different, even though they're doing things that every family does. So great purposeful details there. But yeah, so those were some examples of just the great subtext and naturalistic dialogue, and having those very purposeful moments. A great note that Charles made that he really loved was this moment of the brothers dancing in the kitchen with their mom and, slapping at each other as they circle Meg and fight over her. And he said, this is original. Dig into this material to enhance their characterizations, because these are moments that are full of heart. And again, like he said, it's original. It's something that you don't really see in some of these other stories about a family of a single mom with teenage boys. So definitely dig into these moments, because these are really great moments. To that end, kind of to Charles' point there, I felt like the relationship between the brothers felt very genuine. Fritz and Gavin seemed like they were a pair of brothers that I know myself from my family, and I know from other families in real life. I also love Meg as a character. There's some fun things that she does, like in the opening scene where we first meet her, she is trying to fix a broken air conditioner while she's talking on the phone, and the way that she says, let me check my calendar, and flips through an imaginary calendar. There's just a lot about her character that she is full of life, she's unique, she's exciting, and we really love to see characters like that feel fresh. So great job with that. So that's the end of my notes there. Do you feel like you have any questions, comments, anything like that before we move on?
No, thank you. That was great. Thank you so much.
Yay! No problem. Yeah, and I do want to say, I forgot to give the disclaimers before we started, but this is a good moment before we dive into the, dun 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 of what's not working. We'll kind of go ahead and give the disclaimer that the way that we do editing, we want to do it different than some other editors that you may have come across, sadly, because we believe that being the author and having your authentic voice, you know the story best, and we think that you should disagree with an editor every now and then, because even though we bring our professional opinion, our opinion is still subjective, because art is subjective. And as the author, you have more information about the story, you know the heart behind the story, you know what you were trying to say. So as we help you to say even more clearly what you were trying to say, if we don't understand what you're trying to say and we offer a suggestion that's kind of off course from what your vision was, feel free to disagree.
And I was just smiling. Thanks for throwing the title in there. Yeah, no.
Yes. No pun intended.
Off course from anything. Off course this.
Yes.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. Yeah.
I feel very proud of myself now for absolutely no
great
reason.
job.
Even though
great
I didn't
job.
mean to throw that pun in there. But yeah, we want this to be a conversation. We don't want it to just be like the editor talking at you. And usually when there's more than one of us on these story audits, it's easier to not feel like, we're just talking at the author. But we want it to be a conversation. We want to hear from you. If you have any more information to give us, then, we may not know because we only read the first 15 pages. Definitely interrupt me as we're going. Yeah, this is just a brainstorming session. It's not, we're just here to dump on you everything that we think. So that being said.
Sounds good. No worries.
Sweet. Awesome. So yeah, we'll dive into the what's not working. So to start out with, I'll just say that from my perspective in my notes, what I wrote down as what's not working is kind of a mirror of what was working. Because you showed us that you could do so well with naturalistic dialogue, original actions and descriptions, and infusing subtext into your details. And so since we saw how well you could do with those things, the times when you didn't do so well, it was just disappointing, because I was like, I know how good she can do, and I want to see that level. So sometimes the actions and dialogue felt more like surface level caricatures of these characters instead of realistic humans. And you're showing us complicated families, so I wanted to dig into more like, now show us some complicated individuals, make them individuals and make them feel real. So some of the examples might be on page 1 here. John is asking for help to fix a chair. And this line here, with Amelia's help, John fixes the chair, high fives. I don't know what it was about the high five, but there was something about it that felt a little awkward and generic when I was envisioning it in my head and trying to see how that scene would work. And I felt like, because you've shown us some original family interactions, and I wanted to see something more original here, a more organic way that this interaction can happen, of like a positive reinforcement from a father to a daughter. And I know that you have that creativity in you because I've seen it elsewhere in these 15 pages, so that's where I'm like, dig in more here. Push harder to show us something different. And another example was page 8. Get to there.
Do you all edit screenplays with your company or just books?
Yes. So I will say I've edited a couple of screenplays before, but Jared is more of the screenplay editor. And again, unfortunately, he can't be here today, but we do edit screenplays as well as manuscripts. We all have different expertise that we bring to the table. So Jared's more of the screenplay guy that will give him the screenplays, but the rest of us know our way around screenplays. So again, that part of the reason why we're not commenting on the formatting, because formatting for screenplays is really different than some other things. Part of that were saved because the formatting didn't translate from, the original format to the Google Doc. But if you need some more information on formatting screenplays, we do that in our actual editing as well. So yes, here we go. So this is a moment where I was like, Fritz and Gavin try to exit their bedroom at the same time and they knock heads. And my question is, what kind of preteen and teenage brothers would be rushing to respond to their mother calling from the kitchen so fast that they knock heads? Unless they thought that she was in danger, and then it's like, what's happening? Is she dying? Like, we have to go save her. But in general, I feel like most preteen or teenagers, they're a little bit more slow to respond to the call for,
that's
come to the kitchen.
That's a super fair note. I guess I was thinking food.
Oh, fair.
Because there hadn't been much food for lunch. They had been eating the ice cream out of the freezer, and the older brother had let the younger brother have more, and they talked about the fridge being empty, etc. So when she comes in with food, you make a fair point. I'll definitely go back and look at it, but maybe I should have them smelling the food, and then that's their rush to get out there, something like that. Yeah.
Yes, something about sometimes it's just one little detail that you can add in that, suddenly it all makes sense. So that's a really great detail that, like, you knew in your head as you were writing this, but, when we were reading it, we weren't reading your mind, so we didn't see that detail unless it's written on the page. So yeah, to solve this note, you just add that detail of, they were motivated by food, which is very realistic for teenage boys. Another example of this note would be page 11. Right here where when Fritz and Gavin shout, Meg propels herself forward. And to me this felt like an odd way to end the scene just because it didn't necessarily flow into the next one seamlessly. We don't really understand what's going on. And how it connects with what's going to happen next. So again, maybe this is just, it needs one more detail, or maybe it's something that you can end the scene in a different way to make sure that the storyline is flowing, and as one scene ends, we know why we need to stay to watch the next scene. And then as far as naturalistic dialogue, this moment where Meg is talking to herself and she's trying to psych herself up, she says, think of this as a reset, a chance for adventure. I can do it. And while you showed us some really great naturalistic dialogue, where the characters aren't seeming like they're performing for an audience that they know is there and trying to, like, give the exposition that, of all the history and backstory, this is one moment where I was thinking, I feel like you need to say more with less. What half-thought would you be most likely to mutter to yourself if you're, standing alone in the kitchen and trying to hype yourself up for something that's scary? How can we tell a more poignant story to any listeners based on just a few words that she can say? So there's one example that's, again, my notes are kind of like a mirror of each other, and I make all of these notes because I know how well you can do, because you've shown us. So I want to see every line reach the same heights as some of your best lines. And as far as my next note, I'm kind of giving overarching notes, and then I'll give some examples in the script itself. But in the beginning here, Usually, the rule of screenplays is your first 10 to 15 pages are crucial because that's your first 10 to 15 minutes of a movie. And a lot of screenwriters or executive producers will only read the first 10 to 15 pages of a screenplay. And from that, they're going to decide whether they're going to give you a chance or not. Most people who read screenplays aren't going to read beyond that. So I kind of came up with this rule in the screenwriting community where, and you probably know this, but the first 10 to 15 pages, you need to have all of your information. You have to have your core conflict. You have to have that point of no return already there. You have to have your antagonistic force introduced, your protagonists introduced. You have to have all of this wrapped up in a really short time period so that the quote-unquote real story can start. You don't have as much time as in a novel to kind of give the setup. So some of the cinematography in these opening scenes, to me, as I was reading it and picturing it in my mind, it felt a little stilted. So it didn't necessarily, and this was a note kind of where I mentioned here about the way the scene ended. But it didn't seem like all of the scenes flowed into each other very smoothly. It felt like each of the scenes was its own standalone thing. And I was looking for a more unifying thread to flow through the storyline to show us like why we need to keep watching. Additionally, some of the actions that we were given in the direction lines seemed like there wasn't too much purpose, or there were some actions that, it was short enough to write, but it realistically would take longer to show on screen. Like, for example, making dinner, cleaning a house, rearranging furniture on a, yacht deck. All of these things take time, and they're taking away from some of the precious real estate of screen time that you're working with in your first 10 to 15 pages. So some of these directions also, either you need to be more specific with, what we're doing and how long those things are taking us, or do what you've shown us in some of these other notes that I said, where you're showing like these little things like having family dinner. That scene had a purpose because you were showing us through Meg's action of putting the food off of her plate onto her son's plate. You were showing us the details about their family dynamic and Meg's character and the family's financial situation. So for all of the details in your scenes, make sure that they have that level of purpose, and make sure that the time that you're having us spend watching these people do the mundane things of life, where you're showing us how they do it differently than we might expect. So every little detail, every little scene has to expose more of your characters. It can't just be the mechanical, like, oh, we just have to show this because that's what's happening next. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So last thing, regarding the opening, we started out with the bicker. We started out with
We start with the dad and his two daughters. Yeah.
Yes, I was trying to find the line that made me laugh. It was right here. Everything should be perfect on this Wayfair advertisement on crack. And that was like a really great line that made me chuckle. It was effective at describing your scene in very few words. And so we start with that, and then we have this kind of family bickering. And that leads into a water gun fight. And this was a note where I was kind of like, I was curious what made Amelia make the choice to kind of like, in the middle of a conversation, seemingly unprovoked, she grabs a super soaker squirt gun and, squirts her sister from head to toe. And I was wondering if there is something that prompted that decision from her. Was there a goal that she was trying to achieve with this action?
Sure. So like I said earlier, I have 4 daughters. So just kind of when one of my girls is being bratty, somebody else will take them down. And it's not always with words. Okay. If we're outside, sometimes it's the garden hose or what, ice cube down the back of your shirt, whatever's happening. So that was the intention. Okay. And then the visual too, if they have 4 guns, but there's only 3 of them. So that really introduces the audience to, oh, mom's not here. Yep. Where's mom? And that's kind of why you realize maybe they're bickering because they don't know how to get along without mom.
I really like that. I love hearing that explanation from you, because you're right. There is some kind of funny thing that happens with siblings where when one of them is being bratty, you do have, all the other siblings kind of pitch in to be like, hey, shape up your act before we all get yelled at.
Yeah, and you don't even really have to talk about it. You just gotta
Yeah,
start doing it.
yeah.
Yeah.
You're just like, I know what this situation needs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was thinking because the way that we opened up, again, talking about like your very precious real estate of screen time here, we have uh, a page and a half at least of bickering, rearranging deck furniture, and I wondered if we could condense it. So maybe you start out with this water gun fight. Because, again, like you said, this water gun fight is what's it's doing the most at exposing the family dynamic, the backstory, and what's going on in these characters' lives. So I wonder if, when we're talking about how do we get to the real story sooner in order to make sure that people are invested in this story and they're not just going to put it aside because they don't know what it's about after the first 15 pages. Maybe you might consider putting this water gun fight in your opening, and this is how we first meet this family is, there's a couple lines of bickering and then there's a water gun fight. I don't know. What do you think about that? Does that seem like something that...
Well, so in full disclosure, I also wrote this as a middle grade novel, a 50,000 word middle grade novel.
Gotcha.
And so for me, that's probably my author hat, because I've set up the single mom and her sons as, she's got to fix the air conditioner. She's got to find work. They don't have any food in the house. I'm trying to show that the dad and his daughters have money to spare. They have every luxury. They just don't have the person that they want.
Gotcha. So yeah, and you can do that with this visual here of, the Wayfair commercial and crack. That's something that is, I feel like that contrast there is a really great instinct as a storyteller. We were talking about this in our last episode. Contrast is the tool that helps you to illustrate the themes of your story most powerfully in a way that stick in people's heads. So that instinct to contrast the family's situations against each other, and also within this family they have everything except the person that they want. That's a really strong instinct. But I think that you can do it in slightly less words or slightly less time, I would say. And again, that's just going to help get what feels like the heart of your story showing up on the screen and on the page sooner, so that people are more willing to get pulled into your story without getting lost in the setup. So those would be my notes. Most of it has to do with, just making sure that we're hitting that, it kind of is a deadline of 10 to 15 pages. You have to make sure that, we understand the core conflict. So at the end of the 15 pages, we have the plane crashing. And that seems like where, the story is really starting. So even if we get that a couple pages sooner, then there's your hook. There's your point of no return, and that needs to be set up before the first 15 minutes of your film is over. So yeah, those would be my notes. And I'll kind of just go through kind of quickly some of Charles's notes that he left here, and I feel like a lot of his notes had to do with specificity. So some of the things that I mentioned of making sure that all of the mundane details and directions in your scenes have purpose. A lot of his notes had to do with just digging into, okay, specify this, specify that, help us to see the picture more clearly. So the first note, we're talking about, the opening, setting the scene. We say a tiny dot might be a boat. He suggested for authority, try using more direct and assertive statements. So he might rewrite this into a tiny dot rests in this vast sea, a boat suitable for only who can afford the best in life. And again, in just one picture, you're showing us everything that we need to know about this family and the contrast that sets them against your other family. And again, over here, we have fancy cushions, plants, decorative pictures, and lanterns, umbrellas, a shade awning, and a swing. So where are these items on the ship? Are they all on the deck? Are they kind of throughout the ship? Giving us those extra couple descriptors are going to help us to see the scene more clearly, and then we can kind of fall into the imagination easier. Over here in the slug line, we don't know necessarily that we're by a pool. We're just on Maria's Beauty on the yacht. But if you specify in the slug line up here that we're by a pool, then now we have a better picture painted for some of the action that comes later where they're filling up the squirt guns and all of that. And, when he's trying to force the chair down here, when he's trying to fix a chair, forces, and I know that, some of the formatting didn't translate well. So we had a M dash there that's missing now. But again, if you specify what exactly he's forcing, now we have the picture more clearly in our heads. And again, some of these are formatting things that are not applicable anymore because of the correct formatting that you had that just didn't translate correctly to Google Docs. But some of the writing here, and again, this is nitpicky details, but sometimes just writing in a sentence in a smoother way can help not trip up your readers so that they can read faster. So, for example, maybe rewrite this line. Fritz Robinson, 16, he's a lineman, sports a military buzz cut but a relaxed attitude. Maybe it might be easier to read if we say Fritz Robinson, 16 and a lineman for his high school, sports a military buzz cut but with a relaxed attitude. So just different ways that there's a lot of different ways to write a grammatically correct sentence. And the main thing is just to minimize friction for the reader. So there's more of a nitpicky detail here. You were kind of talking about this earlier about how, it's a really helpful editing tip to hear your words read out loud, because a lot of times your ears will catch something that your eyes don't, because our brains just automatically fill in what we meant to write instead of what we did. So here, when we're talking about resumes crushing his brother at Mario, and again, I'm not sure if this was a formatting thing, but helpful tip for any writers listening: it is true that reading out loud will make you catch some of the details that otherwise your eyes would look over because you're just used to your own story. And this was just another nitpicky, a run-on sentence. His feet declare the height he'll someday reach. He's trapped by preteen chubbiness. Revising this from a run-on sentence into his feet declare the height he will someday reach, but for now, he is trapped by preteen chubbiness. Again, just nitpicky things, but it minimizes the friction of readers so that they can fall into your story easier. Here's another kind of to my note of some of the dialogue hit really hard of like, this is a great snappy line that reads very natural and organic. Here's another example that he picked out of try using more originality in the dialogue to strengthen the characterizations. When these brothers are playing video games and then they're told to clean the house. So Fritz says, "You dust, I'll vacuum." How does this moment define them as characters? How does it set them apart from just any other set of brothers who would have to do house chores? Do they race to decide who gets to do what? How would they trash talk each other as in a game as infamous as Mario Kart? There's different things that you can do because we've seen your creativity in characterization. So we want to see that come out more. Again, in the limited real estate that you have of screen time, every second has to count. So you can't just have a throwaway line of dialogue that's just supposed to move us from one moment to another. Every line of dialogue has to show us something deeper behind it. So here's another note kind of to that end, just an example of what we want to see plussed up because we know how high you can reach. Consider what can cleaning the house show about these characters and their relationship. In similar ways that your scene where, Fritz sees the bill spill out of Meg's purse and stuffs them back in before Gavin sees them. How can this scene of cleaning up the house grab your audience's hearts and show them something that gets them invested in these characters? Here's another specificity thing, just clarifying further that time had passed and they're pulling up a yacht full of supplies they're pulling up a boat full of supplies onto their yacht. And just adding more description here to make it pop a little bit more in our imagination as we're reading. Because again, a lot of screenplay reading, a lot of the purpose of screenplay writing is to help your readers see it cinematically in their mind's eye. Again, like you said, it's a really tricky balance because in novel writing, you have a little bit more wiggle room to play with words and how to express things beautifully. In screenplays, you're trying to use as few words as possible to explain this really big visual picture. So it is a really hard balance to walk of like, what's a detail that we don't need to waste words on, and what's a detail that we do need to specify so that the person reading this can more easily see it in their mind's eye. It's a hard balance to walk, and sometimes bouncing ideas off of outside perspective as a reader can help you see, okay, maybe this is a detail that a reader would want to know. Maybe this is a detail that is self-explanatory, so we don't need it. And there's going to be different opinions on that too. So, like, what one reader might want might not be what another reader might want. Um, so, all these suggestions are take them as you will, take it or leave it according to your own conscience of, what you believe this story needs. Okay, last note here, and this is kind of an example of originality. We've seen you show us characters who are different from just every other character we've seen in a story like this. So here, where Sarah says, "Oh, I broke another nail," maybe because we've seen breaking a nail before. That's kind of a joke of every prissy stuck-up girl doesn't want to break her nails. But also, like, it really hurts to break a nail, so that's fair. But maybe try another thing here. So when she's refusing to help lift the heavy crate, maybe her excuse is something overly dramatic, like, "Oh, I'm gonna sprain my wrist." Maybe that's something that is a little bit more original because we haven't seen it used so often before for these kind of caricatures that we're used to seeing on the screen. Does that make sense?
It does. It's a little bit of an Easter egg too, because as the story goes on and she loses more and more and more nails.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's something that her mom used to help her take care of, and her dad has no idea how to do it. So,
I did see that with the braids as well.
That's with their hair
Amelia,
as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So in that sense, if it's like an Easter egg and it's kind of a gag that keeps building on itself as the story goes, then that's great to leave it. That's where, like, you can disregard this note because you as the author have a bigger purpose.
Yeah, you've only read as many pages as you read. Yeah, you're fine.
Yes. So yeah, and I love that we had that moment too, because this is a great example of, as the author, you have a different vision in your head of where you're going with this. So there is a purpose behind this. It's not just a cliche throwaway thing, even if we read it as that. So it's a great example of, like, why the editors aren't always right, and sometimes you need the bigger picture of what the author actually intended, and that's where you really need to have these conversations with your editors. You have to have editors who are willing to have conversations with you and actually discuss what you intended and catch your vision before just projecting their own vision onto your story. Because that's not what we want to do here at all. We want to amplify your authentic voice, your creativity, and what you believe is best for your story. So I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Do you have any other questions or thoughts about anything that we covered?
I don't think so. I do think one of the kind of parts of a story that I'm trying to get across that I don't feel like every movie does, having been a parent myself for 26 years, parents are really trying to figure it out along the way.
Yeah.
Despite the books,
sure.
Despite the books we read and the fact that we may say things with authority, that's really part of the heart of the story, is that the teenagers are finding their way, but the parents are finding their way as well. That the adults can be just as flawed as the kids.
Yeah.
They're not all gonna always be the superhero that just comes in and saves the day because that's what they do. Yeah.
Definitely. And that's something that I really love, that stories like this help us to understand, because I feel like there was some quote that I read that was like, you stop being a child when you realize that your parents aren't perfect and you become adult the day that you forgive them for not being perfect. And I was like, that's something that I remember clearly walking through as a young person, as, a teenager into a young adult. And I think that stories are something that is so significant in helping us to kind of grasp and wrap our minds around these really big life things that it's painful to walk through life. It's painful to understand other humans when you're still trying to figure out your own humanity. And I feel like stories are something that it's so key in our culture, because stories are what help us to walk through those moments of having to realize that your parents are humans too. Like you said, just because they have to pretend that they know what they're doing doesn't mean that they're not also struggling and unsure and, lacking confidence. And these are things that this is a great middle grade novel to help children start to understand what it really is to be an adult. and maybe have a little bit more compassion on their parents, kind of help bridge the gap in that relationship between parents and children. So that's really special what you're doing with this story, and I love that. That
Thank
kind
you.
of leads into our next topic of
Okay.
talking about theme.
Sure.
Um, we always like to take a moment near the end of these story audits to talk about a theme because, again, this is the heart behind the story. It's the why of why this story exists. What is the conversation that you hope this movie will start? And I think that the strongest stories are the stories where your theme is present in the opening scene or from chapter one, and you can trace the thread of that theme all the way through your story structure. It's kind of like the skeleton that everything hinges off of. So we always like to take a moment to talk about theme, and the way that we usually do it is, we'll take turns sharing what we pulled out of the excerpts that we read as what might be a theme of this story,
Okay.
and then we'll have the author share with us what their idea was. Because another interesting thing about stories is, they always, as the author, you have your vision, you have your idea of what the story means to you, but then once you share it, it becomes alive. It becomes something that doesn't belong to you anymore. It speaks to everyone who experiences it in a different way. So, uh, I'll start out with just sharing. I definitely saw just from this excerpt there were two broken families struggling to find equilibrium. And it seems that they're destined to collide. Um, and that catalyst, that point of no return of, them crashing together and being marooned on an island, I want that to happen a little bit sooner in the story so that we can kind of hit on those themes of these are people trying to figure out how to do life and get through it, and they're smashed together. So that's kind of what I pulled out, very along the lines with what you've shared. But if you were to sum up your theme in like one kind of philosophical statement, what's the one thing that you hope that someone who watches this movie would come away with?
So I did not write this. This is not an original thought. But I always go by the quote, tragedy is a part of life, joy is a choice.
Mm,
Um, because for me, I was in a difficult situation, and my grandma, who was a child with depression and a pretty no nonsense person, basically wrote me a letter but said every day you can wake up and put a smile on your face or not. Like
yep,
that's your choice. And so I really see these characters as they're trying. They just keep
mm,
trying.
yep,
Sometimes they're not going to try great. Sometimes it's not going to work out the way they wanted it to, but they're all going to keep trying. And
I
the
really
two
love that.
families have each, divorce is a tragedy. That's a tragic
It is.
situation for the family that's going through it. And obviously
Mm-hmm.
death is as well for the husband that was widowed. So, yeah.
Definitely, yeah. I've seen that explained in one of my favorite songwriters wrote a song after going through his own divorce, and he was talking about there's this, the death of a person is mourned at least superficially. You have a funeral, you have the closure of, we're closing the book on this chapter of this person's life. But there's other deaths that happen that aren't mourned as much, and the death of a relationship, like a marriage, is one of them. So definitely, like, that's kind of digging into, that's something from my experience that I can see influence the way that your story speaks to me, because it kind of works together of like, this is a conversation that was already started in my mind, and now your story comes along and kind of adds a depth to that conversation. And that's the beauty of stories. That's the beauty of the story that you write becoming not just yours anymore. It
Right.
becomes everyone's, and it
Yeah.
speaks to everyone differently. Yeah, I love that. So, for people who want to see more of the
Sure.
conversations that you've started with your stories,
Mhm.
where can they find some of your other stories?
Yeah, so like I said, I've published 3 books, and they're available on marywalton.com or through Amazon. And then I have a short story collection coming out in April. So that one is a little different for me. It's very edgy. I don't write spicy. I do write murder edgy. And this short story collection was actually inspired after seeing The Housemaid and Send Help. For these are women on the edge in these stories, and they were surviving their inner demons, and their demons life is throwing at them, and they're figuring out how to get through it. So
Sounds like an exciting story. We'll definitely make
that's
sure that we link it in the
thank you.
description
Yeah,
for
it's called
people to go find.
abandonment issues. So
Perfect title. Perfect title. I'm already sold on it.
thank you.
Well, kind of wrapping everything up for today. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me and have this discussion. And also for your bravery, because again, like we talked about at the beginning about finding that community as a storyteller, and the fact that a lot of writers have to rely on the online community and strangers that they meet as avatars online in order to work on their stories. It's not lost on us the amount of trust that and bravery that it takes to share your story with strangers on the internet and say, rip it apart. That's a piece of your soul that you're giving to them, and you're being willing to accept critique on it, and that takes a lot of bravery. I know from my experience being a writer before an editor. So I just want to acknowledge that and honor you for that, taking that step and sharing your story in that way.
Well, thank you very much. I've had a great time.
Awesome. I'm so glad. That makes it worth it to us. We love being able to support writers and, be that community for storytellers who don't have a physical community that they can tap into to kind of help them along the journey. So, anyone else who's listening, if you have a story that you're working on and you want a free editing session, please send it in. We promise that we'll treat it with care, we'll be gentle, but we'll tell you the truth about it, and we'll help you to tell the version that's worth telling and get one step closer to finding the power of your authentic voice. So yeah, before we say goodbye, I want to give you the opportunity, Mara, to, if there's one question that's keeping you awake at 3 a.m. about writing, what would that be? And if there's any answer that we can offer, anyone in the comments can offer their perspective, just a conversation starter to kind of pass it along to the next guest.
Yeah, I think I would pass along actually what people ask me the most when they hear that I'm a writer, which is how do you start? And you just start. You sit down. Yeah. For me personally, like I said, I started almost 10 years ago. And I tried to write 250 words a day. Then I went to 500, 1,000, 2,000. So I'm comfortable at a point now where I'll write about 3,000 words or about 10 pages of a screenplay a day. That's all with outlining, having planned my story, doing all the heavy lifting before you get started with the work. But really just start.
I love that. Start even when you don't feel ready. Because like you said, like you've been at this for so long, and you said that you just felt like you were reaching a point where you were coming into your own and being able to say, like, yes, this is my identity, this is me. I've also met a lot of writers who are like, I can't call myself a writer, I haven't published anything yet. And it's creativity, and being a writer, being a storyteller is a job title that it's what your mind is wired to offer to the world, in my opinion. It's not something that you can just get a couple check marks of I've published a book or I've sold a screenplay. You can't just say I have a degree and that's what qualifies you as a writer. Being a writer is being someone who has a story that means something and you're willing to share it with the world in whatever form. So I want to kind of an answer to that, and also to pass along my own little tidbit to add on to what Mir said. You are allowed to call yourself a writer, and you have every right to call yourself a writer, to call yourself a storyteller, if you are taking that step and being willing to share your words in that way. Because again, like we said, story is a very necessary thing that our culture needs, that all of us humans need to help our hearts to get through this terrifying experience of being human. And also, it's a beautiful gift to give to the world, to help us to see beauty in the pain, the painful things that we have to live through in real life, and see humor in the hard things and the hard challenges that we have to live through in real life. Thank you so much again, Mir, for being with us. Thank you for sharing your story here. And I'm so excited to see what other stories you share with the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next week.